This video describes how to use the query portal in Essence version 1.22. The query portal allows users to run pre-built and personalized queries from the available data sources in Essence. The results can then be displayed in graphs, tables, or line lists. After watching this video, you should be able to access the query portal in Essence, choose query parameters and run a query, and view query results as a time series graph, a summary table, and data details table. When building a query, you will choose query parameters that address the questions where, what, who, and when. Then you choose how to display the data. This checklist can be a useful visual guide to the different components to consider as you create a query. We'll use it throughout this training. These items can be done in any order except for the data source, which should always be step 1. Let's look at the query portal to learn how to choose these parameters. To access the query portal, click on the tab in the main navigation menu at the top of the screen. You will then be presented with the Query Wizard, which is a tool used to build and customize searches. The first field in the Query Wizard is the data source. This is a drop-down list with all the available data sources you can query in Essence. All 4 options that start with ER data will allow you to search visit data from emergency departments and urgent care centers. The most common choices are the ER data by hospital location, which is the default, and ER data by patient location. The data you see will depend on your role. District users see data for your district, regional users see data for all districts in the region, and state users see data for all of Virginia. This training will focus on how to query the emergency department and urgent care visit data by facility location. Now that we have selected our data source, visits by hospital location, we are ready to choose other criteria. If you decided to run a query, you probably have a condition that you are interested in monitoring. Essence has several types of pre-built queries that you can use, so let's briefly review them. Syndromes and subsyndromes bin visits based on the chief complaint or reason for visit. CC and DD categories are queries that have been developed and tested by the Enhanced Surveillance Team or by the CDC. These queries use the chief complaint or CC and discharge diagnosis or DD. Let's look at where to find syndromes, subsyndromes, and CCDD categories in Essence. On the left side of the Query Wizard window, you will see the available fields to customize your query. This is where you will select the condition of interest by choosing a syndrome, subsyndrome, CCDD category, or by entering your own free text query. It is also where you can choose geographic or demographic filters for your query. First, notice that there are quite a few options for query filters. This can be overwhelming at first, especially to new Essence users, but we will walk through the ones you will use most often. We'll start with the condition of interest for the query, then give some examples of filtering by geography or demographics. Essence has 11 broad syndromes, including fever, rash, GI or gastrointestinal illness, and RESP or respiratory. To run one of these queries, click the syndrome of interest, for example, GI, then click Select to move the syndrome into the Selected Query Fields section on the right-hand side of the Query Wizard window. That's where you can see all the parameters you have chosen. We aren't going to run this query just yet. First, we're going to review other options for getting the condition of interest. So to remove the GI syndrome from our query, just click on the red X. Besides the broad syndromes, Essence has about 80 subsyndromes based on terms located within the chief complaint, like asthma, chest pain, and meningitis. You can use the search box to find the subsyndrome of interest. For example, we can search for food poisoning, click Apply, then click on food poisoning, the right-hand arrow, and click Select to identify visits with a chief complaint associated with food poisoning. Once again, we aren't going to run this food poisoning query just yet. First, we're going to learn about one more option for choosing the condition of interest. Remember that both the syndrome and subsyndrome categories only look at the chief complaint, but often we also want to query the discharge diagnosis. One way to do this is to use a CCDD category. These are pre-built queries loaded into Essence. So scroll midway down the list of query fields and click on CC and DD category to see the list of choices in the center window. You will notice that some queries have multiple versions. Generally, you will want to use the highest version number, which is the most current version of the query. For example, VDH has several versions of all drug overdose to identify visits due to unintentional drug overdoses. Version 5 is the most current query at the time of this recording. If you click on the category name and click Select, you will see it in the list of selected query fields. One final option is to click here on CC and DD to write your own free text query about a specific condition of interest. That topic is covered in another training video. Once we have decided on the condition of interest, in this case all drug overdose, we can set the other query parameters, starting with the date range of interest and the time resolution to show the data. Essence allows you to display visits at a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly resolution. By default, the data will be returned on a daily scale. You can modify the start date and end date fields to customize your query. The default time period is 90 days ending on the current day, but you can change it to make it shorter or longer. If you selected the daily time scale, you can click on the calendar icons to select your dates or type them in by hand. If you selected to use a longer time scale like weekly, then you will be given a drop-down menu to select from. The week numbers in Essence correspond with the CDC MMWR weeks, which start on Sunday and run through Saturday. This is especially important to remember if your query includes the current week, which is not yet complete. For this example, we will look at weekly visits for the first 15 weeks of the year. Now that we have chosen the data source, condition of interest, and the time period and resolution, we can add any additional filters to our query. In the list of available query fields, you will see options for choosing geographic or demographic filters for your query. Remember, you only need to select values for a filter when you want to narrow down your search to something more specific. If you want to include all race groups, for example, you don't need to choose those, as the query will by default include them all. For example, you could limit your query to visits occurring at a certain hospital or to residents of a particular health district. As with all the filters, you can make a single selection or hold the Control key to make multiple selections, then click Select to add the filter to the query. You can also filter based on age, sex, race, or ethnicity. One other important filter is facility type, which is about halfway down the list of query filters. This allows you to limit to ED visits only or urgent care only. If you don't make a choice using this filter, the query will include both ED and urgent care visits. For this example, we will limit to ED visits by choosing emergency room and emergency care center. We're almost ready to run the query, but before we do, there are two other fields to mention. The detector field is where you select the statistical calculation that Essence will run on your query. This is what applies yellow alerts and red alerts to your search results and indicates when the number of visits is significantly different than the expected number. If you're unsure which statistical calculation to run, we recommend leaving the default options selected. If you would like to view your query results without these alerts, you can select No Detection. Next, you can select whether to display results as counts or as percentages. The default No Percentage query will show results as visit counts. To show the percent of visits based on a query parameter, choose the parameter that you want in the numerator from the drop-down menu. In this example, if we wanted to get the percent of all visits that were for drug overdose, we would choose CC and DD category because that's where we have the condition of interest, all drug overdose V5. For this example, we will display results as counts, so we'll leave it as no percentage query. Okay, let's revisit our checklist. We have reviewed the demographic filters, condition of interest, location, and dates. Now we're ready to display the query results. The bottom section of the Query Wizard has several buttons for you to choose how to display the data. Time Series, the most common option, will show a line graph of visits over the time period you chose. Table Builder allows you to create a custom table, and Data Details will show the visit level data for all visits meeting the query parameters. We recommend viewing the time series graph first to get a general sense of the trend. Remember that the trend you generate depends on your role. If you're a district user, this graph will include visits that occurred in your district, while state users will see all visits in Virginia, including those by out-of-state residents. The time series graph is shown here, and it includes the total number of visits meeting the query and the average number for the time resolution you selected. In this case, the average number of visits per week. To look at a line list of visits that met the query, click on Data Details below the time series, which will show all visits for the time period you chose. Or, if you want to see the visit data for the most recent week, you can click on the corresponding data point on the trend line graph to go to the data details. Below the graph, there is a data table showing the visit counts for the time resolution you selected, weekly in this example. The table includes links to view weekly data details or maps. Note that when the time series graph is generated, the Query Wizard window is collapsed. It's easy to access it again by expanding the section titled Configuration Options. Maybe we decide that we want to limit the graph to Virginia residents, excluding out-of-state residents. Geography System is where you select the location of interest. Note that this section will look slightly different depending on whether you have chosen to view data by hospital location or patient location. In this case, since we want to limit to Virginia residents, click Patient State, then click Virginia, and click Select to add it to the query. Then click Time Series again to regenerate the graph, this time limited to Virginia residents. Great. We have successfully run a query for weekly ED visits for drug overdoses among Virginia residents. Now we can explore another option for displaying the data. Let's expand configuration options again to return to the Query Wizard. What if we would want to look at visits for diagnosed acute respiratory illness? We can click the little pencil here at CC and DD category to edit this choice. And this time we'll choose Broad Acute Respiratory Diagnosis and click Select. Maybe this time we would like to see the data as a table, so we'll choose Table Builder. This can be especially useful for seeing cross-tabulated data. For the column, we'll choose Sex, and for rows, we'll choose Age Group, and click on the right arrow to select it. Then we'll click on Create Table to generate the crosstab. Now we have a crosstab by age and sex for ED visits with diagnosed acute respiratory illness during the time period we chose. There are options to show the totals and to download the table to Excel. If you forgot which parameters you chose for this query, you can scroll back up and click on the plus sign to expand the description section. This section shows all of the query parameters. In this situation, Virginia residents, acute respiratory illness, ED visits only, during the time period of January 1st to April 15th. To clear all parameters and start a new query, just scroll up to the top and click on Query Portal in the menu. Let's do one last example. This time we may be interested in viewing line level data, so we'll shorten the time period to just a couple of weeks. Perhaps we're interested in chickenpox or varicella visits among Virginia residents. So we'll choose patient state is Virginia, and then we'll scroll down to CC and DD category and choose CDC chickenpox V2. To see the line level data for visits meeting this query, you would click the Data Details button to review information including patient name, age, sex, facility where the visit occurred, and details of the visit, including the chief complaint and discharge diagnosis. Now you know how to run a basic query in Essence and to view results as a time series graph, summary table, or line list. Have fun exploring the query portal, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact the Enhanced Surveillance team at syndromic@vdh.virginia.gov.